Hey everybody, welcome to Critical Thoughts. I'm your host, Braxton Smith, and joining me is co-host Jake Bird. Today we're doing our second installment of Informal Fallacies, common argument fallacies we hear in the mainstream and amongst our peers, and cool ways to not only identify but shut them down. And Jake did a really good job of sharing an article that was fallacious and not only identifying it and addressing it, but just proving it wrong and ultimately shutting it down. So without further ado, we're going to get into our first informal fallacy. Jake?
Yeah, I thought we'd start off with a good one. I think everyone knows instinctively is wrong, and that's the argument from force. You know, because someone has a gun to your head, or because they're, the school bully or something like that, whatever they say is good. The idea of might is right is kind of been the antithesis of what we consider as justice, and completely opposed to not just moral reasoning but logical reasoning.
Yeah, there's actually a scale. I can't remember it right now off the top of my head, but the scale of moral reasoning, that is like the very first level of moral reasoning that we comprehend is when we're like 3 or 4 years old, and we're trying to get a cookie from the plate, and Big Brother, pun intended, says no, you can't have that, and you ask why, and well, I'm bigger than you are. What are you going to do about it? So it's often said too that those that can't develop beyond that first stage of moral reasoning, often they end up in jail or dead. So, obviously that's a very toxic train of thought. And if you didn't mind, are you cool with dabbling a bit into appeal to authority? I'd like to tie appeal to authority onto that one, please.
Well, of course, because it's a pretty obvious one. I'm the police officer, you should listen to me, but you don't seem to be doing the right thing. Oh, well, baton.
The law is the law. That's like, what, stage 2 in moral reasoning? Stage 3, somewhere around in there. That we saw how that could actually go terribly wrong with not only the Milgram experiment, but if anybody's watched The Push, have you seen that yet? The show The Push? Okay, it was a very messed up morality experiment where they got these people together, and they actually convinced people within like 90 minutes, I want to say, to go from committing these little devious acts, like for example, labeling something vegan when there's meat in it and knowing it. And it went from that, and they kept using that, and it kept building up until they finally got to a point where somebody was actually shoving somebody off a cliff, like killing them, thinking they were killing this person. And as we saw in the Milgram experiment too, that was another really good experiment showing that the appeal to authority. Somebody dresses up in a white lab coat and tells you to do something. Well, he's got a white lab coat. Clearly he's qualified. And so they do whatever that person tells them to do. And I see it all the time in arguments. Somebody will say, well, I'm in college, I'm majoring in this, or I'm a professor, and academia really is not the end-all, be-all to what is objectively correct. So.
Yeah, and another example to that point, one of the hot button things is like the redefinition of words right now, and a lot of them, there's this argument about racism equals prejudice plus power. And why does that happen? Well, in some sociological circles, that is a definition. And, okay, so in the field of sociology, some people talk about this. That doesn't mean that should be the common definition. It doesn't mean that it even exists outside of sociology. But they're trying to make the argument, therefore, this is the definition in sociology. It should be not only the definition everywhere, but it should be enforced legally. It should be the rules of how everyone follows and obeys and interacts. And it's like, no, especially since not everyone in sociology uses that term.
Right. Yeah. And so for my informal fallacy to start us off, I actually was inspired by one of the other ones you went off on, correlation versus causation. to put it a little simpler, it ties into it, but it's a little more simple than that, thank goodness. Very digestible for someone like me, I suppose. It's a single cause fallacy. And that is to say, you come into this really complex situation where there's multiple variables, and one thing happens that seems like it's correlated, and it's considered the one cause to it all, without taking all the other variables into account. And this is actually starting to become prevalent in a lot of experiments that are taking place now. There's a lot of these experiments that come out, and there's all these variables, and the controls aren't quite done right. So if you have anybody that's doing this and says, well, this has to be the cause, and they aren't taking all the other variables into consideration, they probably shouldn't be a scientist. And going to get political here. The whole gun deal, for example, saying that because people have weapons is the single cause, and not taking all the other variables into consideration is a single cause fallacy.
Yeah, and a more simple general example of that is the fire triangle, right? What causes a fire? It's not just an energy source, an ignition source. It's not just oxygen, and it's not just a fuel source. You need all three. Right. And, most of the time, for a practical matter, we don't even consider the oxygen part. But, that's the thing. You need all three to make fire. Just saying, oh, he's got a lighter or something, he must be the arsonist. If a fire breaks out, no.
Well said. All right, and what's yours? Second one.
My second one is going to be a combination of two, the fallacy of composition division. And it's basically, you have some object, it's made out of different parts, and there's a fallacy to think that either because the parts all have a trait, then the object has that trait, and vice versa. So an easy one to go with is you can see the human body with the naked eye. Therefore, you can see the cells of the human body with the naked eye. That's obviously false, and that's the fallacy of division, that you can just take one trait from the human body and apply it to everything. And a more relevant example, I guess, would be, there are some bad actors out in the world. I won't go with the police this time, but, crazy gun nuts, right?
Classic libertarian.
The place. Therefore, everyone needs to have guns taken away from them.
Right.
That's
it. Yeah, and I will backtrack a little bit with that other one. Is it is very often that we don't always have all the information, and sometimes we do have to connect the dots. I do this a lot. It drives Jake crazy. I try to connect the dots, but I do always leave myself an opening, and I will say that I believe something to be true, but I don't say it with 100% absolution. That's the thing too. It's okay to entertain an idea, but it's a fallacy to go into an argument and declare something as being factual when you don't have all the components of the argument. You don't have all the facts. So okay, so I'm going to get on to my next one, and that one would be the false dilemma. So this is one of those situations. Actually, let me just give you an example, a real life example. I was at work, and one of my chiefs comes over, and we're getting ready to tidy up a dive side, and he says, "Okay, you got two options. Y'all can either go back to the dive locker, clean everything up, and then we can get ready to go home, or instead we can go down to the dry dock and help them clean up instead." And obviously, nobody wants. We want to take care of our own stuff, not somebody else's. But just seeing that it was a false dilemma, I did a little reverse psychology with him. I'm like, yeah, let's go clean the dry dock. So kind of threw that one back in his face. But it's kind of like one of those too, though. I guess where you'd see it in real life is one of those situations where somebody provides. It's kind of actually similar to false dichotomy too, where somebody presents a situation and they give you their answer, and then they give you almost like a sort of a straw man, which we'll get into one of these days. They'll give you a straw man alternative that's something just totally absurd and kind of pigeonhole you into this one answer. So you're just like, oh, okay. So it gives you the illusion of choice.
Yeah, and, and again, like you're saying, how it's tied to false dichotomy, too. Obviously, there was another answer there. How about we just go home, guys? It's the end of the day. No.
Yeah, that'd be pretty dope, but we're not paid by the hour, so Navy doesn't have to be efficient; they just have to collect taxes. All right, go ahead with yours, man.
All right, my last one will be begging the question, or as it's generally known, circular reasoning. Whenever you start with a certain premise and you end back up with it, or whatever the question is, you just refer back to the question as a statement. And it's like, okay, it's answered. There you go. So, one of them is, abortion is murder, therefore abortion is morally wrong, for an argument as to whether to have abortion or not. Well, murder is morally wrong killing, so you're reflipping back. Of course, if you're just automatically stating that abortion is morally wrong killing, then obviously with morally wrong killing being immoral, it's by default, it's A equals A. You're not really making an argument, you're just making statements over and over again that benefit you.
Yeah, actually, and I will say I actually do remember using some of those in a few debates I've had in the past, long time ago. In fact, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure I actually used one in one of our debates back in high school, and I'm not even really sure if you called me on it or not, but I do know, like, many a times if left unchecked, and you have a crowd that's not really paying attention, you can actually win an argument with that. But I don't recommend it, because if you do get called on it, it can you'll crash and burn pretty bad. And then on top of that, again, is it really about winning the argument so much as coming to the most logical conclusion? So that being said, you definitely want to call these things out. That's the whole reason why we're putting these videos together. And going to get to my last fallacy here is the appeal to emotion. This one is running rampant everywhere. In fact, there's even a video, and actually I'm going to link that video below this one, where all the time in the Senate and in the mainstream media, CNN is extremely guilty about this. And Elizabeth Warren, too, she actually is the one that's quoted in this music video, which is hilarious, where if you don't do things their way, then you just want people to die. And anytime you hear "think of the children," they always use like if you don't do this, children will die. So anytime somebody has to bring something emotionally visceral into a conversation, chances are they're using it as a distraction to take away from the fact that they don't really have a very good argument to begin with. I don't really have. It's pretty much self-explanatory. I don't really have much else to say about appeal to emotion. Maybe you can touch a bit on where the line is drawn, though, where there's factually something wrong with it versus.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Most things are emotionally charged to begin with, and another way I see that fallacy going on is when they try to use it as deflection. For instance, no one, I think, wants to just think daily about government corruption or police brutality or something. So there's, the idea of, us remaining sheep and just not thinking about it, because that's a horrible idea. Who wants to think about it? But the thing is, you need to, and that's part of with the argument too. Just because something emotionally upsets you or distresses you doesn't mean that you still don't need to talk about it and try to figure out how to handle it and where other people are coming from.
It's like the old saying, "No pain, no gain." I mean, all the time. It's in order for us to really progress as not only individuals but as a society, is doing things that are outside of our comfort zone, and that's kind of part of what the First Amendment was about too, is talking about things that are very uncomfortable, because some people would consider that hate speech or thought crime, and if we don't address it, though, these policies, they start to go sideways, and society, you may not address it, but society and the world itself will address it for you, and it'll come crashing down on you. But any final thoughts, though, before we close up here?
I guess we're planning like maybe one more video on these informal fallacies.
The finale, yes. People just can't get enough of it. In fact, that was actually a phone call from one of our fans right now calling to ask if the video had been released yet. Guys, we're working as fast as we can. I know we missed it last week. We'll see what we can do about releasing it next weekend, but it will be the finale. We'll have 3 to 6. We're still working the details out here, okay? We're working as fast as we can here to meet demand. But 3 to 6 informal fallacies, one of the more common ones like straw man, for example, will be there, we promise. And Jake and I will both be tackling it. Hopefully it'll be shorter, so, because I know how dry these videos can be sometimes, but there you go.
That's about it for me.
All right, well, thanks again, everyone, for tapping into Critical Thoughts, breaking through the white noise to bring you the media that matters.